I'm very excited to introduce Sheevaun Thatcher. I've had the pleasure of hearing Sheevaun give this presentation. I was on a sort of a North American conference, and I reached out on LinkedIn, and I was very encouraged by her message, her life story, how she looks at things, but also her focus on analytics. What I mean by that is rigorous facts to validate the situation. And so I'd like to turn the podium over to Sheevaun, who's not only passionate about company excellence and productivity and digital transformation. She's the head of learning and enablement at Ring Central, certainly one of the precursors in innovation to everything Zoom. Some of the co-founders of Zoom actually are former Ring Central, but they're the enterprise secure platform. And just really, really pleased that she made the time. She's also a Canadian living in the Valley. And so welcome, Sheevaun. And I'll move ahead based on your guidance. So welcome, Sheevaun.
Yeah, so I am Canadian. I actually have 3 passports. My dad was born in the UK, and my parents live in Ottawa. I've got a sister there. I've got a younger brother in Toronto, and I've got another brother in Thunder Bay. So we're spread out. I'm the only one in the US, and I've been down here for a long time. So as Cindy was alluding to, I was invited to do a presentation on diversity and inclusion at a conference in the fall. And the conversation started this way. Hi, Sheevaun. Really love you to present again at my conference. I would like you to do it on diversity and inclusion because nobody is talking about it. And he said that to me, and my first thought was, and I said it out loud, as it turns out, maybe you're not talking about it, but every woman I know and a lot of men I know are talking about it. And so I found this comic, which I thought was perfect for this, is, you know, do you think the owl's a predator? Of course not. He's never bothered me. Exactly. No idea what Mr. Mouse is talking about. So this conversation and this presentation is about what Mr. Mouse is talking about. Next, please. So there's a number of images I'm just going to put up here, and this is to go to people's bias and where your bias is. If you look at this one, which one would you let operate on you? Same guy, right? Which one would you let? Next. So Starbucks had a major renovation done on a lot of their stores all over the world in order to address the disabled. This was a Greenwich one in New York after the renovation. So you can see there's a bit of an issue. Next. So this actually was done by somebody I know well. And this was their marketing department talking about what is necessary and what makes a really great BDR. And my first thought was, why do you have a Barbie doll as a representation of people's livelihood and what they do every single day? Why? So that was that one. Next. So this one I love. All right. So a bunch of Canadians on the phone. I can call it soccer, not football. So when in soccer, you have the defensive line, you have a penalty kick, you've got these folks that line up and their job is to defend the goal and defend the goalie. And as such, as part of their task, they need to not only line up and keep their hands down, but smartly, they're protecting themselves, right? That's the way that you do it in soccer. Next, please. In advertising, that is not the way you do it. This is a slide that I came across that makes me absolutely nuts. Because if you look at it, there's 5 people here all around a boardroom. The men are all on one side, the woman's at the end. The men are all talking to each other clearly about business issues. And the woman is standing by herself in a full fig leaf position, admiring these men around her. And I have to admit, this was my company's slide when I came on board. This was the title slide template. It's not anymore. Next. So there are places that are doing it well. Stanford invited these college students from all over the world to come together to talk about diversity and inclusion. What do you see missing though? There is nobody over the age of what, 25 maybe? So there's nobody that has a, more of a legacy voice that's speaking. And there is nobody who is clearly physically disabled in any way. So they're trying, they've got a lot of diversity, but not there yet. Next. So people say, well, what about, you know, I want to be with somebody like me. And my response is, there are things in nature where homogeny is a good thing, right? There are things like peas. You want them all green. You don't want yellow. You don't want brown. You don't want all different colors in the peas, in the pea pod. You do want homogeny. Next slide. But when you're talking about business, that is a problem. This is a Midwest oil company. And this was 2016, I believe. This was the board of directors. See an issue? Maybe? Yeah. Next slide. So the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about diversity and inclusion, but also equity as well. And I think this jelly bean actually is a good representation of where it is we want to go. Next slide. So the agenda is, what is it? Why does it matter? What's the risk if you don't do it? And what are you going to do about it? So a call to action. So what is it? Well, diversity is really the mix of talents, right? You heard Margie talking about it. We've got different identities, talents, perspectives, experiences in the world, and that covers, you know, horizontally, vertically, everybody in the company. It's also about the protected states like gender, age, sexual orientation, all of that. So that's what diversity is. Next slide. Inclusion is something different. You can have a full diverse organization, but if you don't include everybody and you don't let everybody's voices be heard and you don't encourage their voices to be heard, then you're missing half of the equation. Next slide. So this, I think, is a really good representation. Mercer did a big presentation on this a couple of years ago, and I saw this image that they used, and I thought it really, really made it clear, is that, again, with the diverse workforce, when you're talking about the protected status, but when you look at inclusive, it goes to everything, right? Disability, office locations, line of business, geography, thinking styles. Next slide. So one thing that you're starting to see, and I have seen this a lot, and I'm sure all of you have as well, is something that's called woke washing. And woke washing is when you have a company that is advertising, marketing, talking to their employees, all about how they are diverse and equal and inclusive. And when you peel back the layers of the onion, you realize that's not exactly the case. And so these are companies that are appropriating the language, even though they're not doing it. And they haven't, and it's not just saying, you know, yes, we're going to hire more people. It is everything within an organization that needs to be addressed, including internal policies and procedures. And getting people to understand that diversity, inclusion, equity flows through everything that a company does. Next slide. So why does it matter? It matters because, as Tiffany Bova wrote a book called Growth IQ. And if you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's a great book. She is now at Salesforce reporting directly to Mark Benioff. But what she said was, if a sales team isn't diversified, how can it represent or understand the diverse community it's selling in? So think about that, right? If you've got a non-diversified sales force or organization or customer facing people, doesn't have to be sales, anybody customer facing, people will identify with those that they're more alike. And that goes even to some of the speaking, right? We were in our breakout room and Roger was talking about the timbre of people's voices. And it's even that makes a difference. Next slide. So this presentation was given to a room full of sales leaders, all of them. A team member with a share that shares the clients, and this 152% more likely to understand the client. And if you don't have diversity in leadership, and these numbers I'm sure are no surprise to anybody, women are 20% less likely than straight men to win endorsements for their ideas, right? How many of you have been have an idea at a table and nobody pays attention, and 2 minutes later out comes the idea out of a man's mouth and everybody's like, yay, way to go. So that's not always the case. I want to make sure that everyone understands I'm not making a generalization, but there is enough of that happening that these statistics are coming out. 24% people are even less likely, and LGBT are about 21%. Next. So what does company success mean, right? Why do you need it? The environment doesn't foster innovation. We heard that being talked about as well. You want to be able to innovate. And if you are all the same, innovation is going to be stagnant. And if you're standing still, then you're not moving forward. And the only way to move forward is when you have the voice and you have the ideas of a fully diverse culture, a fully diverse environment. Next slide. So let me give you some ideas. These are some case studies. Sodexo is a company that does quality of life services. They were a spinoff of Marriott. They've got about just under 500,000 people worldwide, and 55% of their staff members are women. 58% of the members of the board of directors are female, which is awesome. And employee engagement is increased by, 4 percentage points, and gross profit by 23%. Because of the work that they have been doing. Next slide. Kaiser Permanente is another one. I love this one because 60% of the staff are people of color, number one, and number two, there are 140 cultures represented across Kaiser Permanente. 140. People are talking to people that they align with, that they know, and Kaiser recognizes that's what they need to do in order for them to be able to serve their customers the right way. Next slide. So what is the risk? Because there is a risk if you don't do this. Next slide. So David Brock has written a book called Sales Manager Survival Guide. And David Brock, he's brilliant man. He did a study a number of years ago about what does it cost when you lose a seller, but this actually aligns to anybody that has joined a company. From a learning and enablement standpoint, the cost of training anybody in a year is $350,000. If you lose them, that's like just throwing it away. And so when you look at sales, that has an even bigger impact, because typically sales used to take a certain amount of time. Now it takes almost, 16 and a half months for some of these bigger complex deals to happen. If the deal doesn't close in a short amount of time, so you're going to ramp somebody, let's say it takes them 7 months to ramp, and your deal closes at 6 months, and the person isn't doing, then you're going to lose it. And it's not just $350,000, it's millions of dollars are lost because the companies that you're trying to sell to aren't stopped buying, but they're buying from somebody else. And I have incompetent sellers there. It's incompetent meaning untrained. You've got new people. Every time you have turnover, you've got to train somebody again. And you will lose folks if you don't have the diversity and inclusion and the full equity and let their voices be heard. Next slide. So what are some of the legal costs? The most recent one on this is 2013. So it's not that long ago. And if you look at them, $250 million because of an age discrimination, $240 million for intellectual discrimination. This was a turkey packaging place that hired diverse, right? They hired those that had intellectual challenges, but then they never gave them the opportunity to advance. $192,000 for race discrimination. Coca-Cola, that's who that one was. 176 for sex discrimination, 175 for pregnancy. So this particular company was letting women, particularly, to go out on maternity leave, but then we're calling them back. And if they didn't call back when they were asked, they were released. So they had a big deal. And then one here, the 80 million settlement for race discrimination. That was Sodexo. That's why Sodexo is doing what they're doing now, because they learned the hard way that not doing it costs a lot of money. Next slide. So we have to reassess stereotypes. And I don't know how many salespeople are on this call, but these are the big sales movies that everybody loves. You've got Glengarry Glen Ross, Boiler Room, and Wolf of Wall Street. that's the stereotype, is this hard charging, in your face, just going after you kind of salesperson. And Glengarry Glen Ross, right? The ABCs are always be closing. I have a recommendation. Next slide. Is change that so the ABCs mean something else. So when you are evaluating people and you're looking to enhance performance and career progression, look for these three things instead. Look for attitude, look for behaviors, and look for competencies. Next slide. So what are you going to do about it? So you need to remove the biases from recruiting. And yeah, you just open these all up. So wide range of team members involved in the recruiting process, right? Don't just let it be one or two recruiters. Get other people involved. Focus on the attributes that matter, and it's not a popularity contest. You have to be very, very careful about that, because people have a tendency to hire ones that look and sound and have the same sense of humor, the same sense of behaviors that they do, right? So there was a study done, and folks that were recruiting at Stanford hired more people that came from Stanford than it did from anywhere else. So you have to be very careful about that. And you do that by focusing on other things. You focus on people's beliefs, right? Why do you believe that you're a good fit for our company? And what can we do to show you what our beliefs are? What are our values as a company? Using AI software. There's lots of different software out there that can help, right? So digitizing this process, again, will help remove some of the popularity contest, and you can focus on the competencies that come out of these AIs. Removing names from resumes. I started doing this about 20 years ago because I realized my own bias. And so rather than have names on the resumes, I have them send them to me without the names on it. So I have to focus on what's actually the content of the resume and not any implicit bias I might have in my brain because of somebody's name. And so that works really, really well. The entire management staff needs to be trained on what diversity and inclusion really, really means, right? They may have an idea of that, but it has to go throughout the whole company. Every single manager needs to understand that and needs to recognize that they need to add it. We had a full sales department that I attended a training, and there were 2 women in the room. From my attending the training given to a whole room of men. And I thought we're just missing so much here. And then setting the standard of the interview questions. My team actually created a document called Recruiting Through Curiosity. And it was just a whole set of questions that were given to the recruiters so that they could ask the right questions to the folks that were applying, to the candidates, to make sure, again, that it was a consistent type of process that they went through. Next. So what can we do as leaders, right? Honest discussions. So something that we've done here at Ring Central is we've created a diversity, equity, and inclusion shadow board. So there are people from all over the company that are very diverse that meet on a regular basis to talk about what are the challenges that they're seeing, what are the challenges that they're having. And so that is, we have ERGs, for example, that do some of that. Identifying the areas that need work. This is a very painful process. It's never easy for any company to sit down and go, where are we really making mistakes? Where do we really need to do it? And it has to be a conscious and purposeful effort. And I'm starting to hear about this now, which is great, that companies are actually sitting back and saying, yeah, we got to do better, right? I mean, one of the bigger, Salesforce just went through all that and did a pay equity examination, things like that. Setting quotas for people that are hiring to make sure that their quotas may actually be leveraged based on how they do on the DEI scales. Training hiring managers, right, to help round out, because all too often we say we're only going to hire type A people because that's what we want. Well, there are every other type of person out there that has something to offer, and it's even getting our hiring people to understand that, right? Not everybody has a degree. I don't have a degree, but what I do have is I'm bold and I go for it. And I was taught very young by some amazing mentors not to take no as an answer, right? To ask for things. But that doesn't mean that I'm a type A personality. Reviewing your website pictures. right? Some of those pictures that I showed earlier were from websites, even a Ring Central website. There's nobody on our website at the time that I wrote this that showed any type of physical disability. They fixed that. Next. Different levels of experience. You have to allow people to join and learn. And this is where we had conversations about that in our breakout as well, is that we have a tendency as women, for example, and some men as well, to think we have to know the job before we apply for it. And by doing that, there is an expectation on the people that are filling the positions that the men, they, you know, if they've got the enthusiasm and want to do it, great. But the women, we have an expectation that they know how to do the job. And so we have to change that ourselves as hiring, as managers as well. Revising degree requirements, right? So non-professional, encouraging team members to recommend people that aren't like them, somebody else. Next. Employee resource groups, I talked about that earlier, with diverse hosts as well. Next. And then inclusion, right? So inclusion, not just diversity, but also inclusion. Make sure people's voices get heard. Next slide. Oh, be intentional. Next slide. So there's a lot of resources out there that you can take a look at. In fact, Margie just put up 5 books that she's written. And so I'm going to get them. But these are just some links to some of the sites that you can go to. And some of the business results that I put out here actually came from a book called Indivisible by Allison Maitland and Rebecca Steele, Rethinking Inclusion for Sustainable Business Results. So there's a lot of content out there that you can get and you can use. Keep your mind open. Really, really believe, be purposeful, and companies can change. Everybody can change. Everybody wants to change. And in this day and age, it's a requirement. It's a need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheevaun. That was just so inspirational. I wish I could just do a high five with you, so I'll just pretend here. What I'd like to do now is open it up for questions rather than going to Zoom. Just if you can put your hand up, watch to ensure that all the rest of you turn your mute buttons on. We had a few dishes that I think they're in the background from someone. But any questions, feel free to ask Sheevaun.
Sheevaun,
Yeah.
It's Gary Wood. You made a comment about the conference that they asked you to speak at. Do you find that there's a geographical difference as you move around the United States as to their openness to diversity?
Yes. I've found that if it's difficult to talk about, definitely. But what I found is that in the Southeast, there is a lot of, excluding Florida, there is a lot of hesitation about talking about these things because it's it can be such a fiery discussion that can occur. But most of the ones I go to, no, there isn't an issue at all. In fact, it's encouraged. And now that Gerhard, who's the one that ran the conference, now that Gerhard's aware, he is actively making changes to the way that he addresses folks, what his company is doing, and how he calls speakers in for his conference as well.
Thanks, Gary, for the question. Other questions?
I would just say that we do a lot of call for speakers and presentations. And of all the people we get, I would say about 80% of them are males that respond. So females just aren't even putting themselves out there for speaking opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's true. There are a number of places that women can go to actually register to be speakers if you want to be. Typically, the speaking engagements that you're talking about, there is some kind of monetary reward associated with it. And we have a really hard time asking for money. We have a hard time doing value for value. We have a lot of things. I mean, I do most of my work pro bono. Now that is intentional. I know that I could go out and do, you know, and get paid to do some of this, but my purpose, my feedback now is I've had a long career. I've been in business for 40 years. And so my whole purpose now is to give back. And by giving back, I just don't want to charge for it. I want to actually give it away pro bono and help these folks, you know, men and women. As I said, I've got male clients as well, and I call them clients. I don't charge for it again, but I do have male clients who also are suffering from what we all know is imposter syndrome, for example. And so I think that that may be part of the reason why there aren't as many speakers, but I also think it's the folks that are setting up the conferences are not actively going out and talking to the various groups of women that know the speakers that could be doing it. They just go with their normal contacts, and their normal contacts are people like them.
Thanks, Sheevaun. Other questions? And maybe Debbie, give me a time check as well. Deb, if you don't mind.
Cindy, it's Deborah. Sheevaun, I was about to say that I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we have diversity, inclusion, and equity on all our speaking engagements. And, you know, as an organizer of events, you know, we're very mindful of looking for women speakers, very mindful for making sure and pushing back it's not all men, and no disrespect to Gary and others. And I know Cindy did the opposite of that to make sure that we had men in on some of the panels today. So you know what, I think we know people like ourselves, and if you're not available, so Cindy, if you're not available for a speaking engagement, who's your go-to? Who do you go to? Do you put another man in? Do you put a man in, or do you put a woman in? And we can be very intentional on how we position. You don't have to go to directories. You know, you've got Wendy, or Cindy, you have an amazing group of women that you've brought together, women and men, on this Courageous Women Leader and Men call today, you know, and we had these breakouts. And so we should always be looking and cultivating those speakers in our own pipeline. I think it's incumbent upon all of us.
Thanks, Deborah.
Cindy?
Other
Cindy?
questions, Susanna?
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
I had a, it's a question to, well, it's a comment more to Sheevaun. One of the things that I've been involved with this for several decades, and one of the things that has come out of this is that you have to track. If you don't track, you don't know where you are. You value what you treasure what you measure. And with our firm, we track everything. And you have to, because you don't know how you look. And you don't know what candidates you're presenting, and so on. And it frustrates me when I've been talking about quotas 40 years ago. I shouldn't, but I placed the first females in banking, and I was always around numbers, because that you can't argue with that. The other thing is, all the training in the world doesn't work. The only thing that's really changing things is for people to work with diverse people and see them as leaders. That's the only, all of this has been just throwing money into the, into the ocean. We've needed to change. And unless you see leaders that look like you, unless you work with people that look like you, or even that are different, we won't change. And I don't think there has been much progress in the States. I'm American and Canadian, and I'm very worried right now about this. I think it's a very scary time. And I think it's time now that we do make all these changes. I'm very pleased to see some of the initiatives in Canada with the Black Lives, with the Black Initiative, Black North Initiative, where again, they're talking about numbers. Anyway, it was more my comment, but perhaps I'm a bit too aggressive.
No, data-driven is really important, because that's where you're going to find the truth. You're not going to find the truth by talking to people. You're going to find the truth in the data. You're absolutely right about that.
Thanks so much, Susanna and Sheevaun. I think, Terry's here. Wow, Terry, welcome. Speak up.
One just quick comment and a observation. Sheevaun, wonderful presentation, and thank you for all the insights. And Cindy, I appreciate guys being invited into this so we can continue our education. You had some great suggestions around recruiting and how to reduce bias in recruiting. I would make the added comment around AI. I'm a I'm a chief digital officer at Deloitte. I'm a big fan of AI. I helped create our AI business. AI, however, if you don't have diversity built into the people building the AI, it can actually make diversity even worse. And Amazon and Facebook both learned that they had algorithms, sorting out all the resumes that they get. And what happened was all the people feeding the testing engines fed their friends, their family, their their pictures. And of course, the pictures and the names and everything else happened to be that of white male engineers. And so it got, oh, if you're going to be a successful engineer at at Amazon or Facebook, you need to be a white male. And so it actually created a perpetuating issue for them. So just thinking about that, which is why we need more diverse people in tech. We need more diverse people feeding those engines. So I'm not saying get rid of the engines. I'm saying make sure that we have the right people monitoring them, and that we check the outputs to make sure that it's giving us the diverse set of candidates that we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, my wife is an engineer at Stanford, and she goes to some of these recruiting conferences that are held by Facebook and Google and Netflix and some of these big ones. And every single time, at least once, she is in line to ask a question, and whoever is sitting at the desk looks directly past her and asks the next person in line. So that it's not just that they're not seen on paper. Some folks are just not seen at all in some of the environments. I mean, it's just crazy. And she was wearing a pink jacket. I mean, you can't miss that, but she was missed.
Wow, what a wonderful story to close out this session. I know everybody's thoroughly enjoyed your comments, the quality of the presentation, and the dialogue. I wish we could continue. But like in most things, we do need to go on. We'll make sure everybody's got a copy of everything as well, team. So it gives me great pleasure to move us along. And again, Sheevaun, thank you so much for the
you're very welcome. My pleasure.
Conversation and the quality was just so role model. Thank you so much.